This is a kamidana, a small Shinto altar you'll sometimes see in Japanese homes. It's used to honour the kami, or Shinto spirits. Before we began renovating our house, a Shinto priest came to perform a cleansing ritual to release the spirits from the kamidana. Since the kami were connected to the previous family, the ritual was a way to return them to nature and help us start fresh as the new owners. You can check out the full ceremony in one of my past videos. He explained that we should burn the miniature shrine, the part that housed the kami, but if we weren't going to have our own shrine in our home, the wooden alcove that housed it, beautifully crafted out of solid keaki wood, could and even should be reused. My wife never had a kamidana growing up, and with the daily offerings and rituals required to maintain it properly, we felt it wasn't something we could commit to. So in this video, I'm giving that wood a new life as a display table for the space opposite our entrance doors. It's the first thing that you see when you step into the house, so we wanted it to be visually striking and connected to the history of the home. You know those projects that you start, then something comes up and you don't finish the project until 2 years later? Well, this is one of those projects. I started this way back in the summer of 2023, just after I finished renovating the kura awning, back when bright orange t-shirts were in fashion. Once I got the area cleaned up and put a new tabletop on my professional workbench, I got started. The project seemed simple as I wanted the table to look more or less like the kamidana as it was in its original form, but it turned out to be more challenging than it looked. First, some of the pieces were damaged during removal. You see, this wood is keaki, or Japanese zelkova, and when it dries it becomes rock hard and is extremely heavy. It was just at the wrong height for me to hit my head on, and you don't want to hit your head on keaki, trust me. It was also really big. It felt like it took up half the room. So when the carpenters who were working on our house were taking it down, they had to cut some of the wood to remove it. And there were quite a few metal fastenings like nails and bolts, keeping it all together. I wanted to flip the structure, use the old shelf base as the new tabletop, as it was thicker, and make the original top board the lower shelf. Along the front there's a carved wooden trim, maybe cloud or wave inspired, common in traditional Japanese design. I'm keeping that right where it is, just under the new tabletop. I was also in a rush as we had a family camping trip planned, and our new windows were scheduled to be delivered shortly afterwards. The original size of the shelf was around 180 centimeters long and 4.5 centimeters thick. To join these two parts, I used the same trick I used when making our dining table. Using the track saw, I cut the two pieces at the same time to ensure that the two edges would match perfectly. Looking back at this video now, I don't know why I didn't use any dowels or biscuits to strengthen the joint. Maybe it was because I was in a rush and I didn't have time or couldn't be bothered, or maybe I thought that the wood was dense enough and the end grain to end grain joint would be strong enough if I used the Tight Bond 3 here. However, it hasn't caused me any problems, and as you'll see later in this video, I put quite a lot of pressure on this joint. I decided to use sugi, Japanese cedar, to fill in the gap, mainly because it's softwood and I figured it would be more pliable given my lack of carpentry skills. And then I would paint it to look like keyaki later. I realised later that I put this second bit upside down, but the glue was already dry, so I just left it as it is. Hopefully it's not that noticeable. So this side was attached using a tapered dovetail joint. I'm just putting this in temporarily, so I don't want to force this all the way in case I can't get it back out again later. I needed to trim it because it was just a little bit too long for the space it's going to go into. The problem with this piece is that when the carpenters were removing it, they cut off one of the ends, and I couldn't find it. Maybe it got accidentally cleaned up with the scrap wood during the renovation. Luckily, there was excess length at the other end, which I was able to use to make a replacement for the missing end. Again, I'm not sure why I didn't use dowels or something to strengthen this joint. Gosh, I was lazy back then. But fortunately, it hasn't caused any problems for me in the future. On this side, I did consider making a tapered dovetail joint to match the other side, but I'd never made one before and I didn't want to practice on this piece. Instead, this is where I decided to use dowels. I have no idea why, but anyway, later on, in 2 years' time, I come back and redo this. So these pieces of wood had actually been sitting in my shed for 3 to 4 years since the carpenters removed them from the house. And this bit had rotted a little, so I decided to use some leftover epoxy just to fill it up and make it a little bit nicer, even though this section here won't be really visible in the final product. There were also a couple of holes made by insects which I decided to fill as well. The Japanese insects don't muck around. Look at this guy. I've only just made that hole for the dowels. Now this board was the top of the kamidana, but it's going to be the shelf at the bottom of my table here. And I'm cutting this part up to use as trim. To hold the shelf in place, I used dados, so I quickly knocked together a simple jig to cut the grooves in the sides of the table. At this point, I'm in a rush to get it finished before going camping, and it has led to a big mistake. Even though I tested the jig briefly on scrap wood and it seemed to be fine, when I used it on the final piece, it told a different story. It's not clear from this shot, but the dado is not square with the front edge, and it also is a little bit too wide for the piece at one end. I don't have time to fix it right now, so the pieces go back into the shed, we go camping, the new windows arrive, and I don't pick this project up again until 2025. Once I got all the pieces out again, I needed a bit of time to remember where I was up to and what I was actually planning to do. Then I remembered the issue with the poorly cut dado and set about fixing that. Even though this section will be barely visible, I decided to use some of the keyaki offcuts to fill in the groove here. I decided that the dowels on the non-dovetail side of the table weren't going to be strong enough, so I cut them off and I replaced them with floating tenor. A few weeks earlier I'd managed to pick up a second-hand thickness planer off Yahoo Auctions, and this is the first time that I have ever used one. Now it was time to try once again to cut the dados for the shelf. I rebuilt the jig from scratch and tested it thoroughly, but I was still pretty nervous here. So far so good. It's a little tight and the board is not perfectly flat, but I decided to leave it as it was. With all the pieces cut to size, I'm almost ready for final assembly. Two years ago when I last tried this, we were in the middle of Japan's humid summer. This time we're in spring and the wood has not expanded as much as before, so I managed to get it in pretty easily. I decided to use pocket hole screws to help keep the trim in place, but also it was going to serve as a structural element to keep the table together as well. I use this piece of trim to make it look a little bit neater, hide that little saw mark, and also to add a little bit of strength. In the original kamidana, this board was the top and wasn't really visible. It's actually one large board with two smaller pieces stuck on to make it wider. Some of these screws are in deeper than the others. The ones that are not so deep are just in the line that I need to make the cut. However, they're so firmly embedded that I can't screw them out. I couldn't really think of any other way to do it. It ended up being a bit of a mess, but this edge will be at the back of the table and no one's going to see it. Because one of the sides is slightly twisted, I can't make the shelf a perfect rectangle. I need to make it into a trapezoid shape. That's one way to ruin your nice new blade. Of course, because the wide end of the trapezoid is at the front of the table, I can't slide it in very easily. So not only is it quite a tight fit, but because the board is not completely flat, I'm trying to insert it into the dado grooves here while at the same time flattening the board. The board also has a slight sag in the middle, which I'm hoping not to exacerbate as I force it in between the two sides. And by force, I mean force. My other worry here is that I break the side that I glued together end grain to end grain without any other reinforcement. I didn't end up breaking that, but I did break something else. However, this will be completely hidden, as you'll see in a moment. Fine carpentry, this is not. But I eventually got it done, and now I just need to put on a few finishing touches. I drilled these holes a little bit bigger than they needed to be, just to allow for some wood movement. There's about 4mm of sag, but I'll live with that. This is a water-based urethane varnish in keyaki colour. I had tested the varnish previously on a keyaki offcut as well as a piece of sugi, Japanese cedar. Three coats in total, sanding and wiping clean in between coats. Because the condition of the shelf wasn't that great, I decided to give it a coat over the original varnish. It's got a bit of a yellow tinge which I hope will soften over time. I didn't want to do too much to the top of the table because I liked the way it looked already. I just tried to fix some of the more obvious scratches. This is going to be the visible side when it's in place in the house, so I decided it did need a bit of fixing up. So I sanded it down and gave it a coat over the top, and I think it turned out pretty well. When designing the table, I had to make the shelf at the bottom just high enough so that the RoboVac could go underneath it, but not too high that it would look a little strange. I think I cut it too fine though, and with the little sag, I'm worried that it won't now fit. Now the question is how we decorate it, and I took this pottery vase from our tokonoma just to see how it would look, and it does look pretty good, but I kind of like it there in the tokonoma, so we're going to gradually add pieces that we like as we come across them, but in the meantime we'll try different things. I'm really happy with how this project has turned out. As I mentioned in the beginning, turning this piece into furniture was about bringing a bit of the old home into ours. It feels nice to have something from the previous house now reborn here. It's a small connection to the past and it fits perfectly with what I envisioned for the space. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.